The continued story of Terran, the assistant pigkeeper. I am glad you stayed to listen. Now sit round, as Papa Bear reads a story. Chapter 15. The Island. The Prince of Dawn rose like a shadow from the sedge. Though he had discarded his headcloth and tools, he still wore the shabby raiment of his disguise. Perched on Gwydion's shoulder, Caw blinked and ruffled his feathers, indignant at being awakened. Seeing Terran, however, he bobbed his head and began croaking with excitement. Terran, startled, cried out. Prince Run, waving his sword with great vigor and making as fierce a face as he could, hastened to join Terran. "Why, it looks like the shoemaker," Run called, lowering his weapon as he caught sight of the tall figure. "Is it indeed? Whatever have you done with those sandals you promised?" "Alas, Prince Run," Gwydion replied, "your sandals must wait on other matters." "This is no shoemaker, but Gwydion, Prince of Dawn," Terran hurriedly whispered. Gurgi and Fluter had now run up. The bard's jaw dropped. "Great Balin," stammered Fluter, "to think we shared a stable at Dinas Ridnant! Lord Gwydion, had you only made yourself known to me!" "Forgive me for deceiving you," answered Gwydion. "I dared not do otherwise. Silence, then, was my best shield." "I would have sought you at Dinas Ridnant," Terran said, "but Mag gave us no time. He has stolen away Elenwy. We have been told of a place called Cair where he might have taken her, and have been trying to make our way there." "Thanks to Caw, I know a little of what has befallen you," Gwydion said. "He told me you had chosen to follow the river. He lost you when Lion pursued him, but found me here." "Akron, too, sought Cair Gwydion went on quickly. "When I learned this, I strove to follow her ship. One of the fisher folk sailed with me to the northern coast. Your island people are bold," he added, glancing at Run. "Remember them with honor when you shall be king of Mona. The fisherman would have brought me to Cair itself. This favor I could not accept, for I dared not reveal my mission to him. Yet before he returned to Mona Haven, he willingly gave me the small boat he carried aboard, and would take no reward for his risk or his generosity." "Have you already gone to Cair Terran asked. "Was there any trace of Elenwy?" Gwydion nodded. "Yes, but I have failed to save the princess," he said heavily. "She is Akron's prisoner. Mag moved more swiftly than any of us." "The spider!" cried the bard, with such heat that Caw started up in alarm. "The sneering, sneaking spider! I beg you, let me deal with him. He and I have a long score to settle, and it grows longer every moment." He raised his sword. "I shan't need this. When I find him, I'll squash him with my bare hands." "Hold, hold!" ordered Gwydion. "Spider he may be, but his sting is all the more deadly. His vanity and ambition have made him Akron's willing creature. He shall be dealt with, and so shall Akron. Our concern now is for Elenwy." "Can we not free her?" Terran asked. "How closely is she guarded?" "Last night I rode to the island," Gwydion said. "In the little time I remained there, I could not discover where the princess is held, though I saw that Akron has but a paltry company of warriors, hirelings and outlaws, who have cast their lot with her. None of Auron's deathless cauldron-born is among them." He smiled bitterly. "Without the protection of the Lord of Anuvan, haughty Akron commands only lackeys." "Then we attack them now," Terran cried, his hand on his sword. "We are enough to overcome them." "This task calls for strength of a different nature, and swords are not all we shall have to fear," Gwydion replied. "There is much I have not told you of this matter, and much that I myself did not know. Even now the riddle is not fully answered, but I have learned that Akron's plans are deeper than I had imagined, and Elenwy's plight graver. She must be taken from Cair before it is too late." Gwydion drew his cloak around him and stepped toward the river bank. Terran caught his arm. "Let us go with you," he urged. "We will stand with you, should you need us, and guard Elenwy's escape." The tall warrior paused and glanced at the waiting companions. He turned his green-flecked eyes on Terran, and studied him closely. "I do not doubt the courage of any one of you. but Cair holds greater peril than you know. Elenwy is dear to me, to all of us, Terran said. Gwydion was silent a moment, his weathered face grim and withdrawn. Then he nodded. It shall be as you wish. Follow me. The Prince of Dawn led the companions from the marshy fields to a narrow shoulder of beach. From there they passed along the edge of the sea to a sheltered cave, where a small boat bobbed at the end of a mooring line. Gwydion beckoned the companions to step aboard, took the oars, and with swift, noiseless strokes guided the little craft seaward. As the glittering black water rolled beneath him, Terran crouched in the bow of the boat and strained his eyes for a sign of Cair. Prince Run and the companions huddled at the stern, while Gwydion bent his powerful shoulders to the oars. The stars had begun to fade, and banks of sea mist drifted in chill clouds. Our task must be finished quickly, and before daylight, said Gwydion. Most of Akron's warriors have been set to guard the landward entry. We shall land on the far side of the castle, hard by the outer wall. In darkness, we may escape their eyes. Glue told us Cair had broken from the mainland, said Terran, but I had not imagined it to be this far at sea. Gwydion frowned. Glue? Caw said nothing to me of glue. It was then that Caw left us, Terran explained. Small wonder he could not find us again, for we were buried deep underground. He told Gwydion of finding Elenwy's bauble, the treachery of Glue, and the strange book. Gwydion, who had been listening intently, shipped the oars and let the boat drift. Alas that you did not speak of this sooner. I would have found better means of safeguarding it, he said as Terran handed him the golden sphere, which began to glow brightly. Gwydion spread his cloak and shielded the light. Quickly he took the book from Terran's hands, opened it, and brought the bauble closer to the empty pages. The ancient writing sprang into sight. Gwydion's face was tense and pale. To read this is beyond my power, Gwydion said, but I recognize it for what it is, the greatest treasure of the House of Lear. A treasure of Lear, Terran whispered. What is its nature? Does it belong to Elenwy? Gwydion nodded. She is the last princess of Lear, and it is hers by birth. She is the last princess of Lear, and it is hers by blood right. There is more you must understand. For generations, the daughters of the House of Lear were among the most skillful enchantresses in Prydain, using their powers with wisdom and kindliness. In their fastness at Cair were stored all their treasures, magical devices, and charmed implements, whose nature even I do not know. The chronicles of the House of Lear give only veiled hints as to how these mysteries were guarded. The lore tells of an enchantment known only as the Golden Peladrin, handed down from mother to daughter, and of a book holding all the secrets of those magical devices and many potent spells. But Cair was abandoned and fell into ruins after Angered, daughter of Regat, fled the castle to marry against her mother's wishes. The Book of Spells, which she carried away with her, was believed lost. Of the Golden Peladrin, nothing was known. Gwydion looked down at the bauble. The Golden Peladrin was not lost. What better way to hide it than to put it as a shining toy in the hands of a child? Elenwy believes she had been sent to live with Akron and study to be an enchantress, Gwydion went on. It is not true. Akron stole Elenwy and brought her as a child to Spiral Castle. Did Akron fail to recognize the Golden Peladrin? Terran asked. If she knew its nature, why did she leave it in Elenwy's possession? Akron dared not do otherwise, answered Gwydion. Yes, she knew Elenwy's heritage. She recognized the Peladrin, but also knew it would lose its power if taken forcibly from its rightful owner. Then, too, the Book of Spells had vanished. Akron could attempt nothing until it was found again. And without even realizing it, Terran said, Glue was the one who gained the Book of Spells. Poor foolish creature who thought himself cheated. So he was, replied Gwydion. He could not have seen the hidden writing without the light of the Golden Peladrin. Even then, it would have availed him nothing. The spells obey only a daughter of the House of Lear. Elenwy alone has the inborn skill to read them, though not before she herself has reached the threshold of womanhood. She stands there now, and the spells of Cair are within her grasp. For that reason has Akron sought her so desperately. Elenwy is safe then, Terran cried. If she alone can awaken the spells, Akron dares not harm her, nor does Akron dare harm us, since the Peladrin and the Book of Enchantments are in our hands. It may be, Gwydion answered grimly, that Elenwy is in greater danger than before. Carefully, Gwydion placed the book and the golden sphere in his jacket and redoubled his efforts at the oars. Terran, clinging to the side of the boat, saw a high, dark mound loom ahead. Gwydion swung the craft further seaward, and now rowed steadily in a wide half-circle. The sea swell lifted the little vessel and drove it with ever-growing speed. The crash of waves rang in Terran's ears. Gwydion bent his strength to one oar, then the other, and Gurgi whimpered plaintively as the boat was flung forward into a narrow, foam-filled channel. The pinnacles of Cair rose black against the dark sky. Mist rolled around the columns of stone, which once had been, Terran guessed, proud and lofty towers, but were now crumbled and jutting ruins, thrusting upward like the shards of broken swords. As they came closer, he saw the heavy, iron-bound portals, reminders of a day when Cair had been a fortress, rooted on the mainland. The gates faced the sea, but, since the castle had sunk lower, they stood half submerged in the restless water. Waves churned and beat against them, as though to take the ruins by storm, and wreak their last destruction. Near the massive portals, wind and water had gouged a cave-like hollow, and here Gwydion moored the boat and gestured for the companions to disembark. As they clambered to the rocks, Terran heard a tormented groaning and creaking from the gates, as though they had gained their own voice and cried out against the onslaught of the waves. Gwydion climbed upward. Finding a handhold among the sharp stones, Run painfully toiled after him, with Terran and Gurgi following, to catch the Prince of Mona should he fall. Fluter struggled along silently. Ka had already flown to the walls, and Terran envied the crow his wings as he saw the sheer facing of stone, and the broken parapets brooding high above. Gwydion led them along the base of the wall toward the heavy lintels of the gate. The bastion was cleft as though by a sword stroke, and loose rubble had fallen into the breach. The Prince of Dawn signaled them to halt. "Remain here," he ordered in a low voice. "I shall go first and learn where Akron's guards are posted." Noiselessly, he vanished into the cleft. The companions crouched among the rocks, not daring to speak. Terran rested his head on his arms. His thoughts turned again and again to Elenwy, and to the words of Gwydion. He could barely bring himself to believe the slender, laughing girl could command powers, perhaps as strong as those of Akron. Soon, soon, he told himself, Elenwy would be free. But as his impatience grew, so did his fear, and he looked up anxiously, straining eyes and ears for a sign of Gwydion. He was tempted then to follow the Prince of Dawn, but in another moment Gwydion appeared from the shadows. "Akron pays for a poor vigil," Gwydion said with a hard smile. "One sentinel watches landward, another leans drowsing on his sword, the others sleep." The companions pressed through the cleft. The task now was to discover Elenwy's prison, and Terran's heart sank. Within the walls, the ruins of Cair stretched like a great skeleton. Its tumble of once regal halls and towers lay before the companions, and Terran glanced with dismay at Gwydion. The tall warrior motioned for the companions to draw their swords, and indicated where each of them was to search. Fluter was about to move toward the outlying buildings, when Terran nearly cried aloud. Ka fluttered from one of the towers, and swooped down to perch on Terran's upraised arm. The crow beat his wings, flew aloft once more, and circled the pinnacle. "He's found her," Terran whispered. "Our search is over." "It has only begun," warned Gwydion. "One of us shall climb up and see if it is possible to free her. The others shall take positions farther along the wall to guard against surprise by Akron's warriors." "I shall," Terran began, then hesitated and turned to Prince Run. He bowed his head. "She will be your betrothed. It was your wish that I should prove my valor to the princess?" "Yes," Run said slowly. "But it is my wish no longer. I'm quite content proving it to myself. And I rather guess you might really be the one the princess would prefer to see first." Taryn glanced at Gwydion, who nodded and directed the others to move to the landward side of the castle. As Run went to join Gurgi and Fluter, Gwydion knelt and drew the book and golden spear from his jacket. If aught should go amiss, these must not fall into Akron's hands, he said, setting the objects carefully beneath the loose stones. Deftly, he replaced the rubble and smoothed the earth around it. This must serve to guard them until we return. Kaw had flown back to Taryn. Gwydion rose, and from his belt, took a coil of slender rope, made a loop on the end, and held it out to Kaw, murmuring softly to the crow. The bird snatched with a line with his beak, and flapped silently to the jagged pinnacle, hovered above a jutting stone, then dropped the loop securely over it. Gwydion turned to Taryn. I know what is in your heart, he said gently. Climb up, assistant pigkeeper. I leave this task to you. Taryn raced to the bottom of the tower. The rope pulled taut under his weight, and the mist swirled about him as he sought a foothold in the rough wall. He tightened his grip on the cord and drew himself upward. A sharp gust of sea wind buffeted him. For an instant he swung free of the tower. Below, the waves dashed against the rocks. He dared not look down, but desperately strove to halt the dizzying motion. His foot struck stone again. Bending all his strength to the rope, he climbed higher. A casement opened just above him, and Taryn hoisted himself to the ledge. Within the small chamber, a rush light burned fitfully. His heart leapt. Elodie was there. The princess lay motionless on a low couch. She still wore the robe Teleria had given her, though it was now torn and mud-spattered. The red gold hair tumbled about her shoulders, and her face was pale and drawn. Taryn hurriedly swung himself over the ledge, dropped to the flagstones, and hastened to Elodie's side. He touched her shoulder. The girl stirred, turned her head away, and murmured in her sleep. Quickly, Taryn whispered. Gwydion waits for us. Elodie roused, passed a hand over her forehead, and opened her eyes. At the sight of Taryn, she gave a cry of surprise. Gurgi is here too, Taryn said. Fluter, Prince Run, all of us. You are safe. Hurry. That's very interesting, said Elodie sleepily. But who are they? And for the matter of that, she added, who are you? Chapter 16. A Meeting of Strangers. I am Elodie, daughter of Angered, daughter of Regat, continued Elodie, putting her hand to the silver crescent at her throat. But who are you? She repeated. I haven't the least idea in the world what you're talking about. Wake up, Taryn cried, shaking her. You're dreaming. Why, yes, as a matter of fact I was, Elodie answered with a vague and sleepy smile. But how did you guess? I don't believe dreaming actually shows when you're doing it. She paused, frowning. Or does it? Sometime I shall have to find out. The only way, I suppose, is to look at myself when I'm sleeping. And how I might go about that, I can't imagine. Her voice faltered and trailed away. She seemed suddenly to forget Taryn was even there, and sank back to the couch. Difficult, difficult, she murmured. Like trying to turn yourself inside out, or would it be outside in? Elodie, look at me. Taryn tried to raise her, but Elodie, with a little cry of annoyance, drew away. You must listen, Taryn insisted. That's what I've been doing, she replied. So far, you've made no sense whatsoever. I was much more comfortable asleep. I'd rather dream than be shouted at. But what was I dreaming? A pleasant dream, with a pig in it, and someone who... No, it's gone now, faster than a butterfly. You've spoiled it. Taryn had forced the girl to sit upright once more. Now he stared at her with dread. Despite her travel-stained garments and disheveled hair, she appeared unharmed. But her eyes were strangely depthless. It was not sleep that filled her, and his hands trembled as he realized Elodie had been drugged, or... His heart chilled at the thought of it. Bewitched. Listen carefully, he pleaded. There is no time. I don't believe people should be allowed to come stamping into other people's dreams without asking first, Elodie said with some vexation. There's something impolite about it, like walking into a spider web when the spider is still using it. Taryn ran to the casement. He could see nothing of the companions below, nor any sign of Kaw. The moon was down, and the sky would soon lighten. Quickly he turned back to Elodie. Make haste, I beg you, he cried. Climb down with me. The rope is strong enough for both of us. A rope? Exclaimed Elodie. Me go sliding down with you? I've only known you these few moments, but it seems to me that you make the silliest suggestions. No, thank you. She stifled a yawn. You might try sliding down the rope yourself, she added with a certain sharpness. And let me go back to sleep. I hope I can remember where I left off. That's the worst of having your dream broken into. You can never find it again. Taryn, sick with alarm, knelt beside her. What holds you? He whispered. Fight against it. Can you not remember me? Taryn, assistant pig keeper. How interesting, remarked Elodie. Sometime you must tell me more about yourself, but not now. Think, Taryn urged. Remember, Caer Dallben. Call, Henwen. Through the casement, the sea wind carried trails of mist like tangled vines. Taryn spoke the names again, and the names of the companions. Elodie's glance was so distant that she herself seemed far from the chamber. Caer Dallben, she murmured. How curious. I think that might have been part of my dream, too. There was an orchard. The trees were in blossom. I was climbing up, as high as I could go. Yes, so it was, Taryn pressed eagerly. I too remember the day you said you'd climb to the very top of the apple tree. I warned you not to, but you did anyways. I wanted to learn the trees, Elodie went on. You must learn them anew every year, she said, for they are always different. And in the dream I'd gone to the last branch. It was no dream, Taryn urged, but the life you know, your own life, not a shadow that vanishes in the sun. Indeed, you went to the highest branch. It snapped as I feared it would. How should anyone know someone else's dream? Said Elodie, as though speaking to herself. Yes, it broke, and I was falling. There was someone below who caught me. Could it have been an assistant pig-keeper? I wonder what became of him. He is here, now, Taryn said quietly. He has long sought you, and in ways even he himself did not know. Now that he has found you, can you not find your path back to him? Elodie rose to her feet. Her eyes flickered, and for the first time a light shone in them. Taryn held out his hands to her. She hesitated, then took a step forward. But even as she moved to him, her glance turned shallow and the light died. It is a dream, no more than that, she whispered, and turned away. Akron has done this to you, Taryn cried. She will harm you no longer. He seized the girl's arm and drew her toward the casement. At the sound of Akron's name, Elodie stiffened and tore herself from him. She spun to face him. You dare touch a princess of the House of Lear. Her voice was sharp, her eyes had lost their warmth, and Taryn saw the brief moment of recollection had fled. He knew that Elodie, at all costs, must be taken from this dread place. His terror and dismay grew with the thought that perhaps even now she was beyond hope. He struggled to catch her by the waist, and put her over his shoulder. Elodie struck him full in the face, with such force that he staggered back. Yet it was not the blow that pained him, but her scornful glance. On her lips now was a smile of mockery and malice. He was a stranger to her, and he feared his heart would break. Once more he tried to seize her. Elodie, with a cry of rage, twisted away and broke free. Akron! She called. Akron! Help me! She ran to the portal of the chamber and into the corridor. Taryn snatched up the rushlight and raced after the fleeing princess. Her sandals clattered down the shadowed hallway, and he glimpsed an edge of her robe vanishing around a corner. She had not ceased to call Akron's name. In another moment the castle would be roused and the companions discovered. Taryn cursed himself for a blunderer. He had no choice now but to overtake the bewitched girl before every hope of escape faded. Already he heard a shout from the wall and the clash of blades. The rushlight scorched his hand, and he cast it aside. In the darkness he sped to the end of the corridor and flung himself down a flight of steps. The great hall of Caer Llyr stretched before him, the crimson haze of daybreak filling its ruined casements. Elodie fled across the wide stretch of worn, crumbling flagstones, and vanished again. A hand gripped his jacket and spun him around. A torch flared in his eyes. The pig-keeper, hissed Mag. The chief steward plucked a dagger from a fold of his garments and thrust at Taryn, who flung up an arm to ward off the blow. The dagger glanced aside. Meg cursed and swept the torch like a sword. Terran fell back, seeking to draw his own weapon. The shouts of the awakened guards filled the great hall. In another instant he caught sight of Gwydion, the companions at his heels. Mag spun around. Fluter had broken away from the press of warriors and was racing at top speed toward the chief steward. The bard's spiky yellow hair streamed behind him, and his face shone with furious triumph. "The spider is mine!" cried Fluter, his blade whistling about his head. Mag, at the sight of the frenzied bard, yelled in terror and tried to flee. The bard was upon him in a moment, striking right and left with the flat of his sword in such a wild onslaught that most of the blows missed their mark. Mag, with the strength of desperation, sprang at the bard's throat and grappled with him. Before Terran could come to Fluter's aid, a warrior with an axe beset him, and, despite his stout defense, Terran found himself driven back toward a corner of the hall. Amid the confusion of the fray, he saw Gwydion and Run struggling against other warriors. The Prince of Mona laid about him furiously with his broken sword, and it was to one of Run's sharp blows that Terran's assailant fell. Fluter and Mag were still locked in combat. As Terran raced to the side of the bard, the dark, shaggy form of Gurgi overtook him. With a yelp of rage, Gurgi leaped into the air and clung to Mag's shoulders. The chief steward still wore his silver chain of office. Gurgi snatched it and let himself swing free. Mag gasped and tumbled backward, choking and hissing while Gurgi dangled for an instant, then sprang clear of the falling steward. In a flash the bard was upon the prostrate Mag, heedless of the buffeting from Mag's flailing legs. Gurgi laid hold of him by the heels and hung on with all his strength, while Fluter, sitting on Mag's head, seemed indeed to be carrying out his threat of squashing the treacherous chief steward. Gwydion, with Dyrnwyn unsheathed and blazing, had cut down two warriors who now sprawled motionless on the flagstones. Terrified at the sight of the flaming weapon, the remaining guards fled with long strides. Gwydion hastened to the companions. "Elenwy is bewitched," Terran cried. "I have lost her." Gwydion's eyes went to the end of the hall, where scarlet draperies had been flung back from an alcove. Elenwy stood there, and beside her, Akron. This concludes Chapter 16. Thank you for listening, and remember, have a good day. You deserve it.